I'm Bobby Gilstrap, and we're glad to have joining us tonight Clint Pressly. He's one of the nominees, or will be a nominee, for the SBC President coming up at the 2024 Southern Baptist Convention coming up. And so we're glad to have him joining us tonight. This is part of our series on interviewing all of the SBC presidential candidates. So we'll be interviewing each of these. Most of them are going to be on the upcoming Tuesday night. So you'll want to tune in and join with each of them as we interview each of them. Some of the questions will all be similar. We'll ask each of the candidates the same question. That way you can get a comparison among each of them and how they respond, what their positions are on certain things. And then some of them may be unique to the individual candidate as well. So let's bring Clint in. We're glad to have you joining us tonight, Clint. I just pulled him off, I think. There you are. Sorry about that. That's the problem when I'm having to do all the buttons myself. So, without a doubt. Hey, look, we are glad to have you joining us tonight, and glad to have you to be a part of our series with our SBC Issues and Ministry Facebook group as we do these interviews, and have now. This will be the fifth year, I guess, that we've done these with all the presidential candidates. So we're glad to have you joining us tonight. Thanks, as well.
Glad to be here.
Let's just start off with this. I will say this. We're not going to try to give a lot of bio, that kind of thing on you, but we will. After we air tonight, I'll drop your bio or at least a link to your bio on your church website down into the comments. So anybody that wants to see, churches you've pastored, where you've lived, all that kind of thing, they can go back and look at that at that time. But let's begin with this. What makes you alike or different from most of the other SBC presidents we've had, like, Bart Barber, Ed Litton, J.D. Greer? What's common? What do you see alike, and what do you see yourself as different?
Yeah, I think the commonalities are going to be some of the obvious things. We love the gospel, love the Bible, love the SBC, believe in the mission of the SBC. So we'll have some of those kind of universal commonalities that we all are on that team. What sets me apart from the three that you've mentioned? From Bart Barber, I don't have a farm or any cows. That'd be one thing. I think that probably with Bart, what would be our differences? We probably have different views on the law amendment. I don't know what else would set us apart. I don't know much more than that. Let's see, with JD, both North Carolinians. His church is his church is larger than mine. I probably wear a suit on Sundays. He doesn't. I'm not sure where JD would be on some of the issues. On most of the major things, all three of these gentlemen that you mentioned, we're going to largely be in agreement. There will be some where we probably would be in disagreement, but I'm not having had conversations with those guys. I don't know what they would be.
Okay. Very good. Chuck Kelly he wrote a book, basically researching into the Great Commission Resurgence, and ask, how effective has it been? There's enough data out there now to be able to go back and make an assessment, basically, which is true. There should be enough data outside of the fact that some of the data that we had tracked for decades and decades that kind of help us see our metrics and are we achieving or not achieving, have stopped being reported, which is kind of sad, but he notes that in his book. But in his book, Best Intentions, one of the comments he makes that really stands out is he said that he determined that there had been a very distinct and intentional move toward a centralized control in the SBC rather than as much as of a cooperative control. Or cooperative effort, I guess control would be a different way of saying that. But what would be your perspective on the shift that we've seen since the Great Commission Resurgence, and maybe what your impression is of where we are with the Great Commission Resurgence?
Yeah, I wonder what he meant by that, the centralized control. When you pastor a church, I don't feel controlled by anybody. In other words, we value our autonomy so much that we feel like we're independent. In fact, any cooperation we do is largely voluntary, and We choose to do it, choose not. We choose where the money goes. So I'm not really sure. I trust Dr. Kelly. In fact, he was my president at New Orleans when I was in school there. But I'm not sure what he meant by that. With the Great Commission Resurgence, where we are on that, I think there are some good things. When we focus so much on doctrine, we got all of that right after the conservative resurgence, and then taking that, I think it should largely follow that there should be a Great Commission resurgence. Now, I think that there are lots of sort of holes where we hadn't seen that, but there are some places where we have. When it comes to church planting, or which I prefer would be church revitalization, seeing young pastors go into these churches and as a convention, whether it be the state or nationally, actually helping them bring a church back to life. I think that's a good thing.
So your view basically is you think the Great Commission Resurgence has worked as the way it was kind of promised, or?
I think that's probably an overstatement. I think you're going to have some spots where it looks like it's really working, and then some spots where it's really not. I mean, like for instance, at our church, there as a whole, you think, okay, it's going okay, but you can go and see some places where that's probably not great, and some others where it's really going really well. So I think that's probably, if you had to gauge it, that's what you would do.
Okay. Staying on the Great Commission Resurgence issue, then what do you think needs to change to bring us back in line where we need to be to really actually see the kind of across the board Great Commission Resurgence that we need to see? If baptisms are spiraling downward and have been for quite some time, and some of those kind of metrics are continuing to go downhill, what do you see needs to change? I mean, you're a local pastor now. Admittedly, tell me about what size of church is your church?
$10 million
on a Sunday morning.
Probably 3,000 or so attending and worship. About that.
Okay, so it's larger than what would be considered a normative size church. So if you're talking tonight to let's just call him Baptist Bill. Okay. And Baptist Bill is a church member sitting in his church pew. And for the first time ever, he's going to get to go to Indianapolis to the Southern Baptist Convention. First time ever. Well, this is a big deal. He's going to get to go. But he hadn't really been keeping up with all of the politics and the ins and the outs and all that, like you and I probably do within our convention. So Baptist Bill is sitting there and he's hearing all this about the Great Commission Resurgence. And he hears on one side people saying, well, it's a failure, and boy, it hadn't done what it needs to do. And others are saying, oh, but look, there's a good marketing campaign on that side too. Well, how do you explain to Baptist Bill, who's in this normative sized church? They're not a big mega church, it's just a kind of a normative sized church. Maybe they run 75 or so on a Sunday morning. And he's going to get to go. How do you help him understand kind of what's happened with the Great Commission Resurgence since it was passed in 2010 and what we need to do differently now?
I'm not sure I could help Bill understand, although I have pastored Bill, my first two churches, exactly like what you've described. And it is that when I went to the convention, it was a big treat to get to go. I mean, it's vacation. You're going to Southern Baptist Convention. But when it comes to, I probably wouldn't focus on the Great Commission Resurgence as it is, because it's real broad. You talk like that. I would say, what does it mean to be a Southern Baptist? So I think that's probably where we want to start. And we want to get our doctrine right. And we're talking about that right now. That's a sort of a in-house discussion we have going on that we need to get cleared up. And then we can turn our attention toward the mission. What we've been great at is sending missionaries. Man, when I first went to the Southern Baptist Convention, 1993 or 92, I don't know if it was in Orlando that year, but when I went there, and I had never seen the marching of the missionaries in with their flags. Knowing that, that's what I'm a part of. Like, I was 23 years old, pastored my first church. This is what it means to be a Southern Baptist. So I would say, Bill, this is what we want to do. When dollars are given and they are put to good use, that's the use we're looking for right there. So I would do my best to call attention to what we do with the IMB. We've had a lot of noise here lately, and that noise some of them are necessary noise and necessary distractions have taken away from what it is we actually do pretty good.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt that many would agree that there are a lot of great things. There are a lot of great things for that Southern Baptists have been a part of. Been the greatest mission sending agency, both domestically and internationally, anywhere in the world, without any question. And those numbers, they fan out. I mean, you see that without any doubt. But I think the concern that's being raised across our convention with many is that there are enough things that are going on right now, those kind of powder keg issues that are not only hurting the witness, of our convention as far as the churches and that kind of thing, but we have a lot of churches that are at least talking about, if not already, starting to restrict their funding to certain entities, particularly ERLC, which ERLC always seems to create issues. Well, and part of it's the nature of what they deal with. I understand that, but the other big one has been, the transparency issues that have surfaced with NAM, and then, of course, Southwestern Seminary, particularly lately. But then you have the abuse issues. You have a lot of different things that are huge powder keg issues that could be draining the convention, not only in its outward visibility and outward witness, but it really takes away from some of those really great things that are happening with our disaster relief type ministries and with international missions and things of that sort. How do you
That's what I would do. That's what I would do with Bill, is point him to those things you just mentioned, that there are some really great things that we need to be thankful for. That doesn't mean we don't have issues to address, which I think we do, and want to address them in a way that is honoring to the Lord, that is faithful to what the churches have agreed to. But I don't want the problems to be what we focus on.
How do you help Bill to understand some of these issues, though? Some of the critical issues that are kind of plaguing the convention at this point. Well, let's just take let's take a couple of those. There has been a rise, especially in our SBC issues group. We've seen it come up multiple times about when the GCR was put in place, the Great Commission Resurgence was put in place, then the North American Mission Board got rid of cooperative agreements. Now, just a quick nutshell history lesson for those that don't understand. You probably know, but the cooperative agreements were basically just a written agreement that North American Mission Board had with non-South conventions. And the non-South conventions were the ones that had a lot of support. Many of them, 50% or more of their annual budget came from the North American Mission Board Cooperative Program gifts that came out of all of our churches across the convention. And so the cooperative agreement basically determined how they were going to share those funds, what they were going to do, how they were going to help support evangelism, how they were going to help support church planting, what staff, they supported associational missionaries in non-South areas, things of that sort. And so it just laid out all of that. Well, North American Mission Board, after only a few years, basically eliminated those. They still have an agreement, a strategic partnership agreement is what they call it. But in that agreement, it is not near as cooperative. It's much more one-sided from the side of the North American Mission Board. And that's been I guess you could say testified to from numerous state convention executive directors, North American Mission appointed associational missionaries, that kind of thing. So for Bill in that church, who is hearing this kind of discussion about, well, why don't we have a cooperative agreement again? Why don't we put those back in place where we're actually supporting missionaries of all different kind of stripes, not just church planters, but different kinds of missionaries in different places all across those non-South areas. Why don't we do that? I mean, what's the reasoning behind that? And do you think you could have any impact on moving that direction, or would you be against moving in that direction?
Yeah, I don't know if I could move the needle, or any president could move the needle one way or the other in that direction. A. B, I'd be shocked that Bill that we're talking to was aware of so much, had gotten that far into the weeds. You just gave me a little bit of an education just in that. I think when it comes to the president, I mean, there's been a whole lot of question about the presidents, where they are on certain issues, when really the president, I mean, he presides over the meeting, he appoints committees, and he provides some sort of speaking to the issues for on behalf of representing Southern Baptists. When it comes to some of the issues that you've brought up here, I don't know that you could move the needle one way or the other as a president.
Okay. So feel like that that might not be something
That'd be,
that your influence, you could influence one way or the other.
I mean, you can always have influence, but when it comes to, you know, what you've just described, it's deep into the weeds of how some of that cooperation works. And then, I mean, how much of that was voted on? How much of that was the will of the messengers? How much of that was a decision that we were not aware of? Those things, I don't know.
Right. Yeah. Well, those agreements were all done within North American Mission Board, and
Yeah.
that was always negotiated between the individual state conventions and the North American Mission Board. So it wasn't the will of the messengers, just on that point. So that's within the entity, the way those agreements worked out. Okay, so let's move on. Another one of the issues that was raised up within the SBC Issues Group, and you're wondering how Bill knows all this, is because he's in the SBC Issues Group.
So, oh, okay. There he goes.
So
Good
all
job,
that's
Bill.
been that's been discussed. See.
Okay.
So another one of the issues that was raised is the issue of Calvinism and Reformed theology, I guess. I'm not sure what the best way to state that is. And this has been discussed on and off, and there seems to be kind of an ongoing divide within the convention among those who would be kind of Reform in their approach or Calvinistic in their approach, and those who are not, and seems to be kind of a back and forth. So the question that was asked, hang on, I lost it. Okay, the divide of the Reformed theology. Are you Calvinistic, and what would be your kind of leaning one way or the other as far as moving forward, as far as a kind of a theological approach, I guess.
Well, one is I'm surprised that issue is being debated again. I mean, I used to long, for the last couple of years, I've longed for the discussion between Calvinists and non-Calvinists, because back then, we kind of knew what ground we were on, we could talk and have these sorts of discussions. And so to have the question come up again, I think to some degree or another, in a general sense, everybody's going to be within the convention is going to have some kind of Calvinistic, in the broadest sense of the term, approach. I mean, our love of the Bible, that sort of thing. If you're asking, like, are you a 3-point, 4-point, 5-point Calvinist? Is that what you're asking, Bobby?
Yeah, I guess not so much exactly that. I mean, I jokingly would tell people sometimes I was a 3.75 Calvinist or something. Because I mean, most anybody finds things in agreement among them. I think more the concern, at least if I remember this kind of thread, more the concern seemed to be in line of the approach. Kind of the functional approach, sometimes the doctrinal issues, but sometimes there's a behavior sometimes that's aligned with someone who is a strong Reform or strong Calvinistic as far as their form of leadership in the church and that kind of thing. And I think that can be an issue as well sometimes.
Like, what do you mean? Like, given an invitation during the sermon?
Well, yeah, it could be like invitations. It could be being much more authoritarian. This is the only way in our church. That kind of a dogmatism, I guess. Is that a fair way to say it? I mean, you've been around guys.
I would try my best to, when it comes to the convention, I don't think you could approach any of that with a sort of a dogmatic, ultra reformed approach. I don't think that. The convention wouldn't tolerate that. And that's not who we are as a Southern Baptist Convention as a whole, and general speaking. We're revivalistic, tied to the Bible, preaching the gospel, offering an invitation for people to come and give their lives to Christ. So I think you're approaching that pretty well encircles who we are in a general sense as Southern Baptists.
Okay, let's take a change then, and let's move to talk about some of the issues of transparency. This has been an issue that came up a couple of years ago, first off, when it was brought before the convention. Well, actually, probably 4, maybe 5 years ago, when it really was surfaced. I guess maybe Randy Adams, when he was running for the presidential position, he kind of had part of his, I don't know if you call it his platform or whatever,
yeah.
but he said it frequently. We'll put it that way. That transparency was one of the things he was really going to push for within the convention. Well, since then, we've had attempts basically to get transparent information that basically is put out there from our entities primarily. For instance, in Nashville, I believe it was in Nashville, the West Tennessee pastor came to the microphone. And when he came to the microphone, he just, in the report time for Kevin Ezell and the North American Mission Board, he just asked, he said, I'd like to have the salary structures for our entity leadership. And he said, I've made that request of North American Mission Board. And I've been refused over and over. He said, I've talked to your staff over and over. Anyway, the long story short, he was told both by Ezell and the chairman of trustees at the time that he needed to take that, basically one-on-one, and they would talk about it later. Well, as it turned out, he did. And Ezell was in a meeting with West Tennessee pastors. And I guess it was a associational meeting, if I remember the testimony that I got. And basically, Ezell told them that he wasn't worried about their money, meaning, this is Baptist Bill's money, the normative size church.
Ezell told Bill that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. In fact, I wished I'd pulled it. I could have put it up on the screen, but namwhistleblower.com is the email, I think. One of the archived emails, namwhistleblower.com. And they had an article that had this guy's testimony in it. And his testimony, is verified with these other pastors, was that Ezell said, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but it's like 11% of the total number of churches in the convention support their work. The majority of their work, like 80% of their work. And so basically his word, if I remember it right, was keep your money, is the way it said that. Well, I mean, that's just, I'm not trying to bring that up. What I'm saying is the issue really came up at that point at Nashville, and since then has resurfaced over and over and over about transparency. And so 2 years ago, we had multiple people try to make an attempt to have more transparency, and it was kind of pushed aside by the executive committee. Last year, we had 2 individuals that made recommendations for I would say to have Form 990 level transparency.
Right.
And just to clarify for those who aren't familiar, 990 is the form that nonprofits file to the IRS to show that they're properly using their money, et cetera, et cetera. And it has some things in it that would not be necessary. And nobody asked, neither of these individuals requested that our entities start filing the 990. Religious organizations are exempt from that. But the comment was made, Planned Parenthood is more transparent to its donors than what our SBC entities are, which is kind of shocking in my book. So that was put forth. So that went to the executive committee. In the meeting of the executive committee this past February, when they met, they decided to postpone acting on those motions and move those to be not acted on until right before the convention. So would you be supportive of trying to have our entities be at least that transparent, since they're not really following I want to say the mandate. I wish it were a mandate from our business and financial plan. The SBC business and financial plan says they're supposed to give that information, but they're not right now.
Yeah, so I would certainly be for the entities to follow the business and financial plan. If that is the plan that's laid out, yeah, we should follow that plan. No doubt. Okay. Now, talking about transparency, do you mostly mean, like, is it mostly just salaries? Is that mostly what the call is for?
I don't think so. And of course, the Form 990, it breaks down a number of different things. We did a deal on this channel with Rhett Burns, who was one of the guys who made one of those motions. And I don't remember all the details, but but he kind of walks through the different sections of the Form 990
Right.
that
Yeah.
he would
I've
like
seen
to
some
see.
of that. Yeah.
Okay,
I've seen some
so
of that. Yeah.
okay, so the form has things like disclosure of certain donors that no,
Right.
we're not.
Right.
You don't need all that. But there are other aspects other than just salaries that
Yeah.
are shown as far as
Okay.
income and revenue and where monies are, that kind of thing. And of course, part of the issue, like I'll just take, well, the two that have really surfaced in the last few years, one, North American Mission Board, and the buying of all these houses. They've got millions of dollars invested in houses, and where those are not even in sin cities, and in many of those cases, and some of them very exorbitant houses, according to the photographs of some of the properties.
What have the
And then
trustees? What do the trustees say? Have they talked to the trustees about any of that?
Yeah. My understanding is the trustees have been asked about this multiple times, and most of the time, the pastors that have talked to me about it personally. Now, I understand this is just me, but the pastors that have talked to me about it have said that their trustees have said that they're not to discuss any of that. There's kind of like a gag order been put on them about discussing any of that. Just saying, hey, it's being misrepresented. We'll handle it from the executive, the executive committee level or the executive level at that point, which we can just discuss trustee issues here in a second. But that seems to be one of the issues.
Yeah,
that
I think
if the trustees have like an executive team out of a huge board of, I don't know, most of our boards are how many? 60, 70, 80 people?
At Southern, there are 44.
Okay, so 44, but I mean, that's a huge group of people.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, so that's a huge group of people. That's right, because you're a trustee at Southern, aren't you?
That's right.
And so, but on our boards, the size of the board, many of them, my understanding is they have like a subgroup, like they call it like an executive team. And most of those kinds of decisions are being made within that team, and then the trustees are just being informed. And they may be asked to vote on something, but they're being told this is what we're doing.
Yeah, it's very similar. If you have a board of officers, and then there's an executive group within the trustees, if there are decisions that need to be made, the trustees would hear this is what the executive committee recommends.
Right.
Just like you would in a church business meeting, very similar.
Oh, sure.
And then the board then has opportunity to say, well, what about this? Or what about this? And ask questions. And then the board would vote. And then that vote, whichever way it goes, the board has made a decision. So it's probably not completely fair, at least been my experience. I've been on one board. So this is just from my experience that it seems to me that it's above board. You have a group of people within a larger board make a recommendation, then the large board has to approve it.
Yeah, well, now our other big illustration that happened, here fairly recently, and we've got a lawsuit now that's come as a result of it, was what happened with Adam Greenaway at Southwestern Seminary, and an exorbitant amount of money that was being spent. And of course, the legal documents now state that the home he moved into, the president's home, which is a monstrous, gorgeous home. I've been in it many times, and it's a lot of years ago when I was a photographer and a student on campus, but gorgeous home. But anyway, his contention was that it was left in disrepair, not hardly livable, and they had to spend bunches of money to get it repaired, and then a lot of other expenditures that just seemed out of line. And the trustees, all that went on with the trustees being right there. And all, I mean, it's just that there seems to be a lot of missteps that's happening with some of the trustee boards. I'm not saying all of them by any means. We've got 12 entities, and obviously all 12 entities are not in the news, but we do have some of them that are.
Yeah, and maybe that's, we look at the system, we look at training the trustees. I would be for any of that's going to improve the system we have. The system we have, if you take it just as you've said with the 12 entities, if we just count those 12, as it stands, for the most part, is working. There are places where we need to really improve and some issues that need to be addressed.
Yeah, is any of that things that you would want to really advocate for, as far as things within the trustee system? Or?
Yeah, I would advocate for anything that is going to build back trust with the system that we have. And if that's not possible, than doing something else that is going to be trustworthy. Yeah, I mean, I recognize that there is a significant sort of broad sense of skepticism, and I would be for doing whatever we can to get rid of that.
Okay. Let me read you just a comment. This was in one of the threads on the site.
Okay.
But when they were talking about the issue of transparency, okay, and I didn't write down which pastor asked it. I think it was a pastor that asked that, but let me just read it to you as he wrote it. He said, "How do I know that the money our church donates through SBC causes for the purpose of missions will not be used to pay the cost of legal representation and even judgments against entities? What safeguards protect our mission giving pipeline?"
Yeah. So I think that if you follow the dollar that is given, and it ends up at the state, and then from there it's sent on to the exec, and then on to the entities, if it takes the normal course, then all along the way, that dollar is able to be followed and accounted for. And so I don't know what the question is beyond that.
Okay. Yeah. I think they're just wanting assurance because, well, I'll give you just one example, a personal example, but I'm
Okay.
transitional pastor for a church right now, which is part of my ministry that I'm involved in right now. And it's very much a smaller than kind of normative size church, running, well, last Sunday on Easter, we had 58. Okay. So, but in the discussion about Annie Armstrong this year, one of the leaders, one of the members said, "I don't want a single red cent that I have going to the North American Mission Board."
Oh gosh.
Well, I wasn't stimulating this. I mean, there's enough things happen in a transitional situation. You don't want to stir up something.
Sure.
So I hadn't brought up any of the things I know about North American Mission Board or any of that stuff, any of the stuff that I know has surfaced. But that came up and I said, okay, so it's out here now. We've got to deal with it. Well, long story short, after a good bit of discussion, and there's a lot of smarts around the table. I'll just be honest with you, a lot of good leaders there, exceptional leaders in that little church. Somebody said, "Well, why don't we give the option? Why don't we give people the option of giving to a local church plant, or giving to the Annie Armstrong, and just say, hey, let's just take up the month of March, which we normally kind of focus on Annie Armstrong. Just say, hey, we're going to have a church planting offering. You can give either to North American Mission Board's Annie Armstrong or to this church plant." And we found a church plant that wasn't too far from us that was obviously needing extra help. And I thought that was a great solution. But what I know, because I've heard it over and over and over, is lots of churches are just not giving to Annie Armstrong, and they're telling their state convention, "I want you to restrict our cooperative program giving. I don't want any of my money going to ERLC or going to Southwestern or going to NAM or whatever." And they're making those restrictions because they are uncomfortable with the lack of transparency that they are seeing. They're not hearing the transparency, and I guess there's so many levels between the person that gives the dollar and where the dollar ends up. I mean, and you understand it goes through several different places. Sure. So I guess the feedback I'm getting to some extent is that because there's so many levels there, we're not sure that when we give, that our money's actually going to help missions at that point, and whatever the disbursement should be through the executive committee.
Well, that's one of the first delusions I ever had was, you hear, okay, if you give to church, you're giving to missions, right? And then if you start thinking through where the dollar starts to be peeled off, it can be a little disillusioning. When here in North Carolina, one of the things that had gone on at Hickory Grove years ago, we had the cooperative program down because so much was staying in the state. Remember, there was a big push to have more go out into International Mission Board and whatever. And when the state goes to around 50%, then, a lot of churches raise their cooperative program. We did the same, just because we felt like you wanted to be more, confident that money was going to missions, because that's really the heart of what what makes us Southern Baptists is a real desire to
Right.
have what we give go to actual mission. So I mean, I
Right.
hear that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the way I've always said it is we're all autonomous, which is a
Yeah.
huge deal. We're
Yeah.
autonomous, individual, operating, independent minded,
Yeah.
making our own decisions, governing ourselves, et cetera, but we
It's a
choose to
crazy setup.
cooperate. Yeah, it
Yeah.
is, but we
Yeah.
choose to cooperate for evangelism and missions. I mean, that's
Right.
the main
And
things, Yeah.
so, and I think that's what really should tie us together: evangelism and mission. And we've got to turn at some point. I guess we'll talk about it tonight. I don't know if we will or not. And kind of draw what are the boundaries around cooperation. I think that's a big thing right now that we need to just get right.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think in part what we talked about a minute ago about the cooperative agreements, between North American Mission Board and non-South state conventions.
Yeah.
That's kind of part of that is we don't see it as cooperative anymore. We say, well, I'll give you a quote.
Okay.
A quote from he's retired now, so I won't use his name at this point, but he was a good friend when I was the state exec in Michigan, and he and I were just talking after some of this was happening at North American Mission Board. They were changing the cooperative agreements, and he made the comment to me. He said, "Bobby, what's happening is we're moving away from cooperation and we're moving to competition." Away from cooperation, moving to competition. And what he was saying is now each state convention's having to convince NAM, hey, this is what we'll do, this is what we'll do, this is what we'll do. And then NAM is picking, okay, we want to do this, this, this. And NAM was dictating the strategy more than letting the state convention dictate strategy. And I don't know, as someone who's been involved in missions most all of my life, the missiologist side of me says the mission is best understood the closer you are to the mission field. The closer you are to the mission field, the better you understand the mission.
Yeah.
And so, the accusation that Chuck Kelly made of, hey, we're moving to, centralized control, that kind of is what it looked like with North American Mission Board as they started taking on, all of the pay for, associational, any associational people they funded, but as church planting strategists, and then everybody in those states, state convention staff. I mean, we even have testimony of several people we heard just the other day. In fact, it was a guy made comment, I believe, on the SBC Issues website, at the Facebook page, that Ohio, that North American Mission Board gave several $100,000 to help pay for the state executive director to be able to be in Ohio, as long as they got to choose who it was, as long as they had influence. Where does that come from? That's not the way it ought to be.
Who normally chooses it? Who normally
chooses the state convention does. I mean, that's what happened in your state, right?
Yeah.
I mean, North American Mission Board didn't tell your state this is who needs to be the state convention director. Your state did. You had a search team. You found somebody. I mean, that's the way it worked. And then your team determined exactly what we're going to pay them, et cetera, et cetera. But because they were kicking in money, and my understanding is we've had that happen multiple times now in multiple places, in non-South areas. That's happened over and over. Yeah. So anyway, that I think is kind of part of the push with the cooperation. I think you're right on target if you're interested in really trying to help Southern Baptists be more cooperative, without any doubt. Okay, now let's get controversial. How's that?
Okay.
Women pastors. This has become a deal. Oh, not controversial. It
should not be controversial.
You're right.
I think the Bible is clear, and we should be clear. It is not controversial.
Okay, so the law amendment was put forth last year, was approved. Okay.
Yeah.
It has to come back for a second vote because, just to clarify for anybody who doesn't know, this is an amendment to the Constitution, is what the law amendment is. It's different than what we have in our Baptist Faith and Message, which is our statement of faith, that most of our churches agree to, at least in a general form. What is your position then on this law amendment? Should it pass? Should it not pass? Do we need it in addition to the Baptist Faith and Message? Do we not need it? Give us your take on that.
Okay. I think that we saw the need. It happened in 2022 when the Credentials Committee couldn't bring themselves, this is my paraphrase, to actually take the next step with Saddleback. And then wanted to create a committee to maybe study how to interpret pastor. And after that, the law amendment started circulating and made sense that it became a way to help apply what we already have in the BF&M. So it feels like the Baptist Faith and Message is very clear. And some would say that the mechanism worked, and it eventually did, but it was pretty messy. The law amendment, in my estimation, helps us put some real clarity on what it means to be in cooperation. That if you are, aligned with the Southern Baptist Convention, and your confession of faith is a statement much like ours, including and not against what we've said about the role of pastor being for male only, then I think that's the circle we draw around it. So I think in short, I think the law amendment actually helps us there. I think it provides clarity. Clarity can be really useful, so we're not debating.
Okay, so that is something you see to be a positive thing at that point.
Oh yeah, I mean, it came out early. Mike Law sent it. I didn't know Mike. I didn't know him, and he emailed it to me because I was on the board at Southern, and Southern Seminary had passed something very similar. So his amendment sounded a lot like what we had one of our resolutions.
Right.
Like,
and
that makes sense to me.
Just for folks who don't know, Mike Law is who you're talking about. Mike Law.
Mike Law.
The amendment's named after the law amendment.
He sent that to me and several other people. And so, I thought, this is exactly what I believe. I just assumed that this is what all Baptists believe, Southern Baptists. And so it wasn't until a few years ago I realized that you don't actually have to, as a church, affirm BF&M to be in the convention. I know you do with the entities. I thought churches did too. Was probably 8 or 10 years ago I realized, oh gosh, it just has to be something that is not contradictory. I think the law amendment helps us in that regard.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's move on and talk about some of the abuse issues. Give us your take on where we are relative to abuse. We've had the abuse task force that's been in place. We had the Guidestone report. There's a lot could be said about that, but let's try to keep focused as much as we can on where we are right now. And in our the executive committee, as they met this last meeting in February, they talked about a new organization. I've heard people call it an entity, but it's not an SBC entity. It's an outside organization, a nonprofit. What can you tell us about this? How that can where are we? Just give us kind of your take on this.
So I don't have any more inside knowledge than what you would have. I mean, I've heard what you've heard. A couple of things. I would not want to have to be any of those guys. A lot of them, they've worked hard. They have hearts to see, victims treated correctly and churches responding in a godly, legal, right way. So a whole lot of what they've done has been helpful, and actually been helpful to me just to raise awareness for Hickory Grove. As a local pastor, I'm thinking, man, I don't want my church being vulnerable and the people of my church vulnerable. So there are some good things that have come out when it comes to raising awareness, making sure our checklist is right, that we are screening and training and helping victims and responding correctly when it comes time when, God forbid, something like this happens. So some of that is really good. And when all the sexual abuse talk hit, it scared most of us to death. I think rightly so, because of the horror of sexual abuse. The Christian impulse is to run toward that. And so I think that's what you saw is a whole lot of born again Christians running toward an issue. And as time went on, we find out that, some of what we thought that was this widespread that the convention was overrun and just died through with sexual abuse. That's not necessarily the case. That there are some horrific things that have happened in local churches that local churches should have taken care of and didn't. The convention can provide resources and help and directives. So I think those would be some of the good things that have come out of what we've seen.
Well, is your perspective that this is a systemic problem? Is this
That
a
is
are
that is
we at a
not my
crisis?
perspective.
Okay,
I think the
clarify
best way
that,
to
because some people are
yeah,
using that, and
yeah.
in all honesty, I mean, let's just kind of lay it out there.
Okay.
Those who are survivor rights defendants, and we need to hold them up. I mean, those who are survivors, we want to take care of them and care for them well. But there are some of them who are very much saying, "Hey, we want to sue the SBC until it is in
Yeah.
oblivion." We
Yeah.
want to run the SBC off the face of the earth. It's a horrible organization, et cetera, et cetera. But it seems to me that they're trying to hold all the autonomous organizations that are in the SBC all together as one group as
Yeah.
such. And we're just like the Catholic
Yeah.
Church. The
Yeah.
Catholic Church
Yeah.
is over all of that. And so what is your view? Is this a systemic problem? I mean, how do you phrase that when somebody asks you about it?
I would say that one instance of abuse is a crisis. That is a crisis,
Okay.
and that those that are responsible should run to that crisis. And if we can, other churches that are autonomous, if you want to help with that, that certainly is. But as far as a systemic um, convention-wide issue, I just don't think that we have the proof of that. I think the convention should have awareness raised and help the churches to address the problem in their local churches, because that's where it's happening. The crisis will be, in the local church, but not with the big C church of the convention in a systemic crisis. It's not the system that has brought about the crisis or fostered a crisis.
Okay. So in your view, then, what have been our mistakes from the SBC executive committee level
Yeah,
in
yeah,
handling this thing?
yeah, yeah. It's hard to be Monday morning quarterback.
Oh yeah, no, I get that.
I hate to turn around and say those guys handled that poorly, because the truth of the matter is it scared all of us. I mean, every one of us that are pastors. I
Sure.
mean, it is you don't want to even have to, but just the horror of it. So pointing fingers by way of mistakes, yeah, I'm not sure. I think that as time goes on, we'll see more and more where we could have done things better. But since we're sort of still in the middle of it, and I would be slow to throw too many rocks at those guys.
Yeah, no question, there are difficult decisions had to
Yeah,
be made.
yeah.
No question
I
at
think there
all.
are
So,
probably some things that I disagree with that have gone on, that I might would have done differently. But I can tell you this: I wouldn't want to have been asked to do it.
right, yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
as the president, if you were elected in June, then
hmm
you will step into the role of being the face of the SBC.
right.
So, how do you feel that you need to represent what's going on and address this abuse issue?
I think you try to represent with truth, what is sensitivity to those that have been hurt, and how to equip the churches to best handle it in their churches. How do we equip the churches? I think that maybe the best thing that's come out so far is the ministry toolkit. I mean, that really does help any church of any size can get better at being equipped and stepping through. I mean, in their whole process, it's really simple to do, and it helped us at Hickory Grove. I think
Yeah, and
that's what you would
you're a
do.
pretty good sized church. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
and you think, oh, and God forbid the holes that could be there,
yeah.
and so that's been helpful, and I think every church can be helped in that regard. So some of that is just information and educating and doing what Christians do.
Well, I think one of the best things about the toolkit, just to be honest,
Yeah,
uh, is for most churches, the largest majority of churches, going back to Baptist Bill and his church running
yeah,
75 on a Sunday,
yeah,
everybody. You don't need name tags. Everybody. Everybody, about uncle and aunt and who's sick and who's not sick. I mean,
right, right,
everything.
right.
And so there's this trust level that's there.
Yeah,
And somebody who comes into the congregation and all of a sudden says, "Hey, man, I love working with kids. Oh,
yeah,
great. We need somebody
yeah,
to work with kids." Uh,
yeah,
and the toolkit helps to raise that awareness that
Right.
you can't just be that trusting. I know you want to be, and that's
You
the
just can't.
nature of the Christian kingdom
Yeah.
of wanting to be trusting and loving, right?
Yeah.
But that's why churches are such a soft target,
Right.
without
Absolutely.
any doubt. And so the toolkit, I think that's a great
Yeah.
recommendation on
I
your
agree.
part. Yeah,
Yeah.
without any doubt. Well, let's talk about this Great Commission Resurgence Review Task Force.
Oh man.
I'm sure you wish you were on that.
I'm not even sure what they're doing, Bobby. You're going to ask me some questions here in a second that I don't know that I have an informed answer on any of that.
Well, I really about the only question that we had surface in the group relative to this is that a number of interviews have been done. We know they've interviewed, like Randy Adams and Chuck Kelly and several others. I don't remember all the names that were listed, but those individuals have been interviewed about what they have seen and what they have learned and what they've discovered and what they've assessed, for the time that's gone by. So are you hopeful for a particular kind of angle of recommendation, or I mean, what do you hope comes from that, or what do you want to see come from that?
Yeah. I truthfully haven't given it, a lot of thought when I'm thinking about the review task force. So I think I would give general answers where there are gaping problems, point them out, and then maybe some steps to solution. And then what are some of our things that we can do better? I mean, we want to be constantly, examining that and then changing what needs to change. So that's probably the best I could do by way of an answer.
Okay. Let me just give you straight up another question. I'm going to kind of rattle through some of these pretty quick here because we've camped too long on a few of these.
Yeah.
But I'll just read this one. In light of NAM and ERLC's claims in multiple federal court filings, does any SBC entity have any rights or privileges over a state convention, association, local church, or Baptist minister or staff of one of these?
Oh, does the organization have any rights or privileges over?
Yeah, I think, and the only reason I know kind of where that question's coming from is because we've had several interviews that I've done where the language that the North American Mission Board has used in court filings with the Will McRaney North American Mission Board case, they have repeatedly used phrasing like the Baptist Church. They referred to themselves as the Southern Baptist Mission Board, not North American. It's Southern Baptist Mission Board. They've referred to the Southern Baptist Church, like the Catholic Church. So they've used that language. And in the last, the judge who made the decision that now has sent this case back to the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals for the second time, he used the same language that the North American Mission Board did in their court documents in writing his decision. In other words, he said, the Baptist Church, I can't make a ruling on this. It's out of my jurisdiction because I can't determine what the Baptist Church does or the Southern Baptist. Well, there is no such thing as.
None of us can, right?
There's no such thing. But that's the language they're using. So that's the background, I think, behind that question. Is in light of those court documents that have now happened at the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court, the Supreme Court, now the Northern District in Mississippi Court, and now it's gone back to the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court again.
Wow.
The same kind of language.
Okay. Man, I'm always hesitant, especially like if by some miracle I get elected president. Let's just say there are 5 candidates out there now, so who knows what's going to happen, right? I mean, who knows? I would hate to say something that could be recorded and then used again. We've seen it happen in court, either for or against something that has not yet been resolved. So I don't think I could speak intelligently to the question that's been asked.
Okay. And again, that's difficult, but I know that it's an issue that has come up. Yeah.
In a broad sense, I mean, churches are autonomous. And there is no such thing as the Baptist Church, if that's what you're asking, like the Catholic Church or the Presbyterians.
Well,
I
and I
serve
think that's because the way I've described it is what they've done is they've set up a precedent of connectionality.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because like in the Catholic Church, when there was the abuse situation,
Yeah.
right? Who was held accountable? The Catholic
People
Church.
just don't know what to do with us. They don't know what to do with
I
our
know,
denomination.
I get it. I get it. But it's our job, at least my understanding, I would think it's our job to represent to the court who we are.
Yeah.
For us to represent, this is our polity, and not to use such language and such phraseology to represent ourselves to be something we're not.
Gotcha.
So, that just seems to make sense to me. Okay. I didn't ask a minute ago about the ARC group. This is when we were talking about abuse.
Oh, yeah.
Talk about that just a little bit. What do you know about the ARC group? I mentioned it, but we didn't talk about it. What is its purpose? Why?
Okay.
How are we going to fund it?
I don't have a great handle on the ARC group as I understand it, and I could be really mistaken. I think it is an attempt to have an outside to maintain the insurance that we have for all of the convention employees, IMB, that sort of thing, and then be able to create a list, and we'll have to do that outside of our entities. Beyond that, Bobby, I don't have a really great handle on what it is and how it works completely. It's a bit confusing to me.
Yeah, and the ARC stands for Abuse Reform Association.
Abuse Reform
Commission,
something like that. And it's an entity that is outside.
I should have had that written down. Yeah. Oh, here, I got it. I do. Abuse Response Commission. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Abuse Response Commission is what it's called. Okay.
Yeah, well, I don't have that. I can't speak enough to it to say, oh, this is what it is, and this is what it's not, and this is how it's going to be funded, because I don't think we've gotten there yet. You know, had some of the entity heads, come out publicly and say that they were not going to. And so if there's that sort of confusion among those that are going to know much more than I know right now, it does give you a little bit of pause.
Well, and back to the earlier question that the member of the group asked about how do I know my money's going where it's supposed to be going, and it's not going to be funding abuse payouts or some other kind of legal bill or something else. And that's a very real question, because like I had real concern over the Send network using them contributing money to help with the abuse reform situation that we had with and primarily because in my mind I always think our SBC entities, that's funded through our cooperative program. Okay, but then I had to step back and remember, now wait a minute, I have to remember that the Send network, not Send network, Send Relief, make sure I say that right. Send Relief spends hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to get millions of dollars through the government, getting government grants.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whoever approved they do that.
But,
but maybe that's where some of that money they've gotten through government grants or something. But the concern obviously is if I give my dollar, through my church to the cooperative program, they send it through the cooperative program. I don't want my church having to pay for the abuse payout for somebody else. That church ought to be the one responsible, or whatever the organization is,
the offending
the
party.
Abuse occurred. Yeah, that all that should be worked out. Okay. Another question here real quickly, is unity for the sake of being unified more important than being unified in sound doctrine?
No.
Explain.
If we don't have sound doctrine, we can't be unified. We're unified around the gospel, and we need to be unified around what our statement of faith is. We get that right, then we can be genuinely unified in our mission. But if we don't have a clear understanding of what it is we believe that binds us together doctrinally, then we don't have what's going to drive us devotionally when it comes to missions. So I think we got to get doctrine right.
Okay. Yeah. Doctrine is important without a doubt. And unity has to be in addition to or come with that.
I think that's part of the big tent, smaller tent kind of talk. And the drive to have a big tent is well intentioned. Like those guys that think like that, they're missionally We want to have as much money coming in to reach as many people. That is a noble goal. That's a good thing to want. I think the others of us, and I would be on this side, that are not offended if the tent isn't quite as big. If we can draw some clear lines around it, are functioning out of a desire for doctrine. That doesn't mean the guys over here don't love doctrine. They do. But I think that's part of what the debate is. And I find myself on the other side of the issue.
Very good. Well, look, let me give you the last couple of minutes. We're
Okay.
Running just a hair longer than what I'd hoped, but take just a couple of minutes. I mean, what are the things you want to see if you're SBC president elected? What would you want to project to the people that is important for who you are and why you're the best guy to lead?
Yeah, I don't know that I'm the best guy to lead. I don't know. I do love the Southern Baptist Convention. I love the fact that we have historically been very clear on what it is we believe with the Baptist faith and message. That's why I'm for the law amendment. I do think there are those that will not be for the law amendment that I can stand side by side with, that are genuinely complementarian and for some other reason that's not theological wouldn't be for it. But I do think we need clarity in that regard. And then that clarity helps sort of give strength to our cooperation to build back some genuine trust so that there's not so much skepticism. And we can start once again focusing on those things we actually do really well when it comes to evangelism and missions with the IMB and with planting churches and really Southern Baptist churches helping other dying Baptist churches to revitalize. I think we need to give some attention to calling out young men in the ministry. I think there's going to be a vacuum. There are a lot of churches, you're serving one right now, churches that don't have pastors. And I think we need to press harder into helping young men desire to be Baptist preachers. I mean, it's a great profession and we have great seminaries. So I'd like to press that into what we're doing and who we are, and then really unify around those things. I mean, we have some really good things to unify around and turn our attention back to what we do best, and that is living out the Christian impulse with disaster relief, with missions, with education. That's sort of kind of what would be what I want to do.
Very good. Well, Clint, we are so glad to have you joining us tonight and appreciate your honesty and answering questions for us tonight. We appreciate that and look forward to seeing the days ahead as you're being a part of the group that is now getting larger and larger that are running as candidates for that. Thanks again, man.
All right. Thank you, Bobby.